The desert, an inhospitable landscape for many, but a way of life for a select few. There was one civilization that didn't just survive these sands, but thrived here. These ancient lords of the desert who used camels to traverse this unforgiving land. The Nabataeans. And they are remembered for building one of the great wonders of the world.
I'm travelling to Jordan to explore the extraordinary history of the Nabataeans and their magnificent rock-cut city, Petra. I'll be finding out how they created one of the ancient world's greatest trade centres, here at the edge of the desert. From the advanced engineering they used, to the strange gods they worshipped, I'll be discovering more about the mysterious people who called Petra their home. Petra lies in the modern state of Jordan, in a region of mountains and deserts, about 50 miles north of the Gulf of Aqaba. It sits between the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and the lands of the Middle East. After its heyday 2,000 years ago, for a long time Petra was kept a secret, only known by local Bedouin tribes. But in 1812, a Swiss archaeologist, Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, donned a Bedouin outfit and snuck in.
Burckhardt weaved his way through this narrow canyons, surrounded by tall rocks on either side, escorted by local Bedouin.
He recorded the experience in his journal. I was without protection in the midst of a desert where no traveller has ever before been seen. After proceeding for 25 minutes between the rocks, we came to a place where the passage opens. On the side of the perpendicular rock, directly opposite, an excavated mausoleum came in view, the situation and beauty of which are calculated to make an extraordinary impression upon the traveller.
What Burckhardt had stumbled upon was this.
It's still the best known building in Petra, known as Al-Khazne in Arabic, which translates as the treasury, thanks to an apocryphal tradition that it housed hidden riches. In fact, it's not a treasury at all, but almost certainly a mausoleum, literally carved into solid rock. It's 25 meters wide and nearly 40 meters tall.
This might immediately conjure up images of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but we think that this was probably the tomb of a Nabataean king, probably of King Aretas IV, who, arguably, was the greatest Nabataean king of them all.
King Aretas IV ruled between around 9 BC and 40 AD. He battled the Jewish ruler Herod Antipas, who executed John the Baptist, and won favour from the Roman Emperor Augustus. He received the title Lover of his People. It was under Aretas's rule that the Nabataeans enjoyed a golden age. His fabulous reputed tomb reflects his great power, but also contains features influenced by other ancient civilizations.
I want to point out some key features of the treasury, just to show how magnificent it is. First off, let's have a look at the lower floor. You see straight away those 6 massive columns. They're a type called a Corinthian column because of those beautiful tops. They're roughly 10 meters tall. right above that, very Greek temple-like in its design, you have what looks like a continuous frieze, and you can see the decorations, you can see cups and winged lions, so mythical creatures. Then we go up to the second story, and right in the center, you have that circular structure, once again very Greek-inspired. This is what we call a tholos. At either side, you might be able to see those reliefs of figures, one on the left, one on the right. They have skirts on, and they may well be carrying axes. So it's likely that those reliefs depict Amazons.
I'm getting special access to enter an area that people aren't usually allowed to go into. I'm heading inside the treasury.
You climb up these steps through the Corinthian columns, and you're in this massive entranceway. There's a side chamber to my left, a side chamber to my right, and then the main event, this massive 8-meter high entrance. Originally there would have been a door, that doesn't survive. And inside, this was where Aratas would have been buried. Wow. You enter into this massive room, and at first glance it does look quite barren. However, to me, well, the devil is in the detail. For instance, right next to this, either side of this chamber, you can see the outline of those two very Nabataean looking columns.
The columns have distinct tops or capitals, thinly decorated with flowers, and are very different to the more elaborate Corinthian columns outside. Faintly, they protrude from the rock.
But what I love the most are the walls themselves. When you feel them, they're incredibly smooth. And remember, this was cut out of the rock, and yet these people, they managed to keep these walls beautiful to touch even today. It's testament to the exquisite craftsmanship that went into building this monumental space.
The interior feels plain yet grand, using just the layered beauty of the rock itself. But there is so much more to Petra than the treasury. This giant city stretched for miles. And it didn't just consist of tombs. Petra was a world of the living as well as the dead, full of temples, shopping streets, government buildings, and entertainment. It's estimated that more than 20,000 people lived here at its height, 2,000 years ago in the reign of Aratas IV. But Petra didn't exist in isolation. Too often we forget the bigger story of the mysterious civilization who built it. The Nabataean civilization boasted nomadic origins and thrived in this harsh environment, exploiting the wealth of lands far beyond these deserts.
This was one of the great gateways into Arabia, connecting that peninsula with the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant. Imagine groups of traders and camels, these ancient caravans filing through this landscape, bringing precious goods with them. But as picturesque as this landscape is today, let's not kid ourselves. This was a tough land back in ancient times, unless you were a Nabataean.
Much less is known about the Nabataeans compared to other ancient civilizations, but we do have tantalizing clues to help us shift away the sands from their story. Consistently, ancient historians like the Greek Diodorus highlight the Nabataeans' desert survival skills. These skills allowed them to dominate the lucrative Arabian trade routes with the help of a very special animal.
The camel was instrumental to the Nabataean way of life. Diodorus recorded how they raised and pastured camels in the desert, and it may well be that it was their ancestors who first domesticated these beasts in this area of the world. Now, camels were built to minimize the amount of water that they lost. Not only that, they were incredibly strong. They could carry roughly 3 times the amount of a pack horse. And if goings got tough, well, they could be a source of food and of milk. They were the ultimate desert companion. And so it's no surprise that the camel became the symbol of the Nabataeans.
Camels were the ships of the desert. They were controlled by the Nabataeans and enabled them to create and nurture one of the most lucrative global trade networks in antiquity. Using nomadic tracks across thousands of kilometers, they transported exotic goods from India, southern Arabia, Ethiopia and Somalia, all the way to the Mediterranean. Jordan remains a centre of global trade networks.
Assalamu alaikum. Do you have any frankincense?
And you can still track down valuable trade goods from antiquity in its busy markets.
So what types of goods would the Nabataeans have traded? Well, there would have been spices, there would have been precious metals like gold and copper. There was even this black, sticky, tar-like substance called bitumen that they got from the Dead Sea. And of course, there was incense, these sweet-smelling aromatics made from dried tree resin. Items such as myrrh, and of course, frankincense.
The Greek historian Diodorus recorded how the Nabataeans obtained incense from southern Arabia and brought these precious aromatics across the desert caravan routes and up to the Mediterranean coast to be traded on to the Greco-Roman world. The Roman geographer Pliny the Elder described the incense route as covering just over 2,000 kilometers. Frankincense tapped from trees in Yemen could take 65 days to complete its journey to the Mediterranean coast. And the great trading hub on this route was Petra. This ever-expanding city got rich riding on the back of the camel caravans, battling their way across this wild, hot terrain.
Petra was a living and breathing city, and this was right at the centre of it, because behind me you have the remains of a monumental arch constructed in the 1st century AD, and we are walking along the colonnaded street. This was right at the heart of Petra, hence its name, Becado. Now, you need to imagine Petra some 2,000 years ago. All along here, there would have been colour, there would have been statues, there would have been fountains. And right up these stairs, well, that was the great commercial hub of ancient Petra.
This huge forecourt probably belonged to the main administrative building at Petra. It's speculated that officials gathered on these seats to decide important matters of the Nabataean kingdom, matters of government and business. By the 1st century AD, Petra had become one of the greatest trade centres in the world. Traditionally, its beginnings are believed to have been 400 years earlier, in the 4th century BC. But its origins are mysterious. What motivated the Nabataeans to settle here and build this great city? Dr. Matthew Vincent has been excavating at Petra with the American Center of Research, digging for clues about its beginnings.
Matthew, what do we know about the whole emergence of Petra?
All right, the short answer is we know nothing. And that's the part that distresses people, right? There's so much more to be discovered. As we know, this site is hardly touched. Like, unfortunately, like this place, only a few percentages have even been dug. 85% is still under the ground. There's so much more to discover. At this point in time, some of the current theories say that it's probably a century before. So rather than the 4th century, maybe we have earlier 5th century work. But if we try to sum it up to the basic points, first off, the Nabataeans are involved in the trade routes. Now, whether they are simply the traders themselves or they're capitalizing on trade routes, bringing people in, moving their products from the Far East, say, for example, the incense routes, bringing in the frankincense, the myrrh, moving those out to the Mediterranean. So they're moving from what probably was originally local nomadic tribes who might have just been involved in sheep herding. And then they capitalize on trading and they start settling in here and things start growing. But it's probably happening a lot earlier than what we know.
Yeah, because the word nomadic always gets thrown around with the Nabataeans, doesn't it? And then they become settled and live in great cities like Petra. I mean, do we know much at all about that process? It's not instant, I'm guessing.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's, you know, we want it to be binary. We want to imagine that there's a moment where there's no Nabataeans and suddenly they're there, established. There's some sort of catastrophic event that just simply positions them to be in the place where they're at. But it's definitely a gradual process. You know, at this point in time, research is suggesting maybe it's actually 100 years earlier than we previously thought. We have evidence for Nabataeans actually mingling with the local tribes here. So the Nabataeans are perfectly positioning themselves. They're strategists. They know what to do. They're politically positioning themselves to be with the most powerful tribes in the area, and they're growing and growing and growing. So we can only imagine as that process is happening, sure, maybe they were nomadic beforehand, but even then, what does nomadic even mean for some of these tribes, right? Whatever the case, they knew how to leverage a moment, leverage a trade route, and grow from that, but everything positioned themselves to stop being nomadic tribes, settle in one area, and begin to grow a much more sedentary life.
How important do you think Petra was for the early Nabataeans?
Fundamental. Petra is perfectly positioned at that time. It is literally the axis of many trade routes coming together in one place. And of course, there's the natural resources. There's good agricultural land around here. There's an abundance of water as they managed it. And so they're able to not only just take advantage of the trade routes, but actually eke out a life here thanks to their engineering and their ingenuity. And sure, it takes them hundreds of years to get there, but they do arrive there. And that says everything about who they are and their persistence and their tenacity and their desire to really just succeed as a people, as a tribe.
The success of the Nabataeans wasn't only due to their monopolization of trade through this region. They also controlled another vital resource: water. Mountains tower over Petra. The city is perfectly located to catch water from rainfall and natural springs flowing from all around. And the Nabataeans had the skill to harness it.
The Greek geographer Strabo recorded how Petra abounded with water sources, and the archaeology certainly supports that, because wherever you look in Petra, you can usually see the remains of the complex water system, if you know where to look. We are currently in the Seek, this winding canyon just before the treasury. And down here, you have this deep channel. This was where water would have flowed. So imagine you're one of those people walking into Petra, you're walking through this canyon, and to your side, you would have heard the trickling of water flowing down this channel.
This incredible water system consisted of over 125 miles of channels and pipes. It's been estimated it could provide up to 8 litres of water per inhabitant per day. It's made Petra a fertile paradise in this unforgiving land. A city full of gardens, orchards, and ponds.
Here's the thing. water in this part of the world is power. People come and visit Petra and they think of the city of the dead. They walk through the Sikh, these beautiful kilometers of near silence, right? Now, I want you to just shift gears for a moment and just think about the power. These guys are flexing, to borrow from modern terminology, right? The same thing, if you go to Granada today, you go to the Alhambra, you hear water everywhere. The same thing would have been here. The entire Sikh, the entire entry into Petra would have been filled with the sound of water. This place would have been filled with plants, vegetation, pools, baths, the works. Over there, we have basically a curated sort of waterway, a river. So again, like you would have come in here, this would have felt so full of life. And again, imagine you've just spent 2 months in the desert on your camels, moving your goods from here. You're hot, you're tired, you haven't showered or bathed for who knows how long. I don't want to know. I don't want to even imagine it. But you get in here and all of a sudden there's a flex, there's a power. They're saying like, we are a people who not only like control the land, control trade routes, we control water. It's a massive flex on the side of the Nabataeans.
This water system was built to sustain and awe anyone who flooded into this trading metropolis. Diodorus recorded how the Nabataeans stored large amounts of water in incredible underground tanks or cisterns, lined with waterproof cement, making them the only people for whom the desert was safe.
All right, Matthew, you've taken me to the side of the temple that's not a temple. What have we got in front of us here?
It's a little bit difficult to imagine, but if you can just sort of close your eyes for a moment and actually imagine that we've got a massive pool out here, nearly 50 meters squared, right? This would have been lush, just imagining the sound again of water. You're in the middle of downtown Petra, the center of the city, and you've got the water moving through here, the massive pools. We've got cisterns here, cisterns behind us, channeling all over this place to bring water right here into the center of the area.
And I'm guessing, can we imagine there being lots of these types of water sources right in the center of Petra? Not just here, but maybe the other side of the street too, all around.
Absolutely. So on the other side of the colonnaded street, we actually have what's basically a river kind of built into the area here. And again, they're channeling the water. As you look through the entire site, everywhere you look, there's always some sort of channeling happening. They were absolutely brilliant hydraulic engineers. They knew how to do the damming, they knew how to do the channeling, but unlike the Romans, they don't modify the landscape to meet their needs. They actually adapt their needs to the landscape, and they know how to bring in the water using the natural landscape as a resource.
The tenacious Nabataeans did not go unchallenged for control of this land. Swiftly, their reputation as wealthy desert lords spread. As early as the 4th century BC, mighty neighbouring superpowers were already eyeing up their treasures, determined to take them for themselves.
One of my favourite stories about the Nabataeans is also one of the earliest, when they successfully fended off invasions led by a very powerful warlord called Antigonus. Antigonus the One-Eyed. He was one of the great generals following Alexander the Great's death. Now Antigonus, he saw how rich and wealthy the Nabataeans were. It's 312 BC. And he sent 2 armies against them. But on both occasions, the Nabataeans fended off Antigonus's forces in the desert, and ultimately, Antigonus was forced to come to terms. Now, what I love about this story is twofold. Firstly, Antigonus and his forces, they were the superpower of the time. So the Nabataeans, even though they were greatly outnumbered, they were able to fend off the superpower. But also, what's important is the success of the Nabataeans then, that is key in ensuring their independence. And independence which would prove vital in them building the great monuments that dominate Petra today.
Antigonus's failed invasions mark the arrival of the Greeks on the Nabataean stage. For centuries after, the Nabataeans neighboured great Hellenistic superpowers to their north and west, the Seleucids in Syria, the Ptolemies in Egypt, and then, ultimately, the Romans. The Nabataeans became greatly influenced by these other cultures. As more and more people came to Petra, it was only a matter of time before these visitors left their own mark on this city.
This is the key entertainment building here at Petra. It's the theatre. I must admit, I feel quite small down here. But straight away, when you come into the centre, you realise the Greek influence on this particular structure. I'm standing now in an area called the orchestra, and I can see rows of seats in front of me, and almost a dividing line about a half the way up. This lower level was most likely where high officials, where the wealthy would have been positioned when they were here, and they were watching performances down where I am now in the orchestra. And above that almost halfway line up there, you see a bigger wall, and above that would have been where everyday Nabataeans would have sat for those performances. You can see the remains of rock-cut tombs above the theatre to my right as well. Those are older buildings, and this new theatre was almost plopped right on top, and we know that there were a few tombs that had to be kind of removed or were placed under when this theatre was added.
When first built, Petra's Grand Theatre would have fitted about 3,000 people. It was later extended to hold a whopping 8,000, across 45 rows of seats. But what kinds of performances were put on here?
Almost certainly plays, although we must admit we don't know of any Nabataean plays, but given the Greek influence, we could imagine maybe Greek comedies or Greek tragedies happening. But it wouldn't have just been plays. There would have been also musical performances, whether that be a whole chorus or someone playing an instrument.
Sitting here with the whole theatre to myself, it takes a leap of imagination to picture this huge venue crammed with audiences 2,000 years ago, enjoying entertainment from across the Mediterranean and the Levant. Amongst all these grand monuments, it's easy to forget about the homes of the Nabataeans, where they lived amongst this splendour. But some excavations have focused on their domestic architecture. I'm visiting a prime location with archaeologist Sami Nawafle.
Well, Sami, this is quite the complex. I can see so many different rooms, and this looks like a hallway in front of us. This seems like it was one of the big structures in Petra.
One of the big structures in Petra, one of the biggest villas or houses in the site. It consisted of different rooms and 2 sections.
And who do we think then would have lived in this big house?
We believe that they were Nabataean, big family lived in this house, a wealthy Nabataean family.
You can understand why a wealthy family would want to build a massive house up here. You can really get it. When you look around, the views are absolutely stunning.
It's amazing location. So it's facing amazing view for the cliffs, the mountains, and the suburbs in the southern and the eastern portion of the site, other monuments, and also the royal tombs over there.
This grand villa, known as the Mansion, is also home to a feature the Nabataeans got from the Romans: a private bathhouse.
This is a very important room, which we believe that could be the steam room. This part, in fact, has the path, Nabataean path or Roman path, Roman style. You can see the hexagonal pavement here.
Yes, look at these.
And you can see the hypocaust.
Oh, so that's hypocaust. So that's central heating underneath this floor.
Central heating under the floor.
On a day like this, it's boiling hot in the middle of the day. It makes you wonder if the Nabataeans, did they really need central heating? Did it ever really get cold?
Of course, especially in winter time, very cold. Nights time also it's cold, even in summer season.
It's such a striking house, isn't it? And doesn't it show the connections that the wealthy Nabataeans had, that They're bringing cultural influences from different parts of the Mediterranean, like a hypocaust. I usually see this in a Roman villa, maybe in southern Britain or in Rome or in Italy. But here we have a hypocaust in this wealthy mansion at Petra.
Of course.
This Romano-Nabataean home is a reminder that Petra was a melting pot of cultures, where Nabataeans were joined by Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, Judeans, Syrians, and more. This was a multicultural cosmopolitan city, full of art and architecture that took inspiration from all these different peoples. Petra was a city for the living, but all around, looming large close by houses, market stalls and temples were reminders that Petra was also a city of the dead. Petra is home to more than 600 rock-cut tombs, including great architectural wonders of the high and mighty, like the so-called monastery, and the treasury where I began my exploration. But there are also hundreds of smaller tombs for less high-ranking members of society.
So I've just come along a bit from the treasury, and initially you pass more of those monumental tombs. But then you reach here, it's much wider area, and then you notice across the valley, not a few, but dozens and dozens of rock-cut tombs.
They are all cut from the living rock, expertly sculpted from top to bottom by Nabataean stonemasons. Some are more elaborate than others. The contents of the tombs were robbed in antiquity. We know the names of only a few of their owners. But I'm climbing up above the valley to find one that reveals an insight into power at the Nabataean royal court. I'm heading for the tomb of Uneshu. An inscription was discovered which revealed that this spectacular tomb was built for Uneshu, who served as the Nabataean equivalent of a prime minister. Uneshu played his part well, because his reward was this immaculate tomb for him and his family. His mausoleum has Nabataean, Greek and Roman styles combined. On its top is a classic Nabataean feature, 2 sets of steps representing stairways to heaven. The facade would have been decorated with colourful plaster. Beyond the classical doorway lies the tomb itself. I'm finding out more from Petra archaeologist Ahmad Bakit Nawafle.
Wow, Ahmed, this is stunning. I mean, what are these slits in the wall, these massive slits we have in front of us?
We are now inside the tomb of Uneshu. The slits we're seeing inside here are containing the graves themselves. You can count them, there are like 11 slits in there, so we're talking about at least 11 family members from Uneshu families here. So, you know, the graves inside the slits in here, you can see them. They are like some of them for 2 people, some of them for 1 person. The burial customs, actually, when the Nabataeans need to bury someone, they took off all the clothes off, and then they wash the body by water, and then they should close all the holes in the body, give the body the good smell by perfuming it by some frankincense or so, and then they wrap the body in pieces of cloth, put the body in the graves, and then they close the graves by slabs and mud. Those were their burial customs, actually. So Nabataeans actually buried. They did not cremate or mummificate bodies.
Once you look more closely at Petra's hundreds of tombs, you start to see a series of building styles. But this so-called obelisk tomb, named after the pointed pillars on top, is the only one of its kind, and may have been created for the family of a Greek called Abdomankos. But it's not just the outside that is intriguing. What I'm interested in is the room directly beneath the burial chamber.
To me, this is a really exciting room because it hints at another great influence on tombs at Petra. And the first clue should be these 3 sets of stone benches covering 3 sides of the tomb. One here, second one in the center here, and the third one right there. You also can notice that the top, the surface of them, is slanted slightly inwards. Now this was where, 2,000 years ago, Nabataeans reclined, they dined, they'd been on cushions, on fancy furniture, they would have been drinking wine, they would have been eating food, they would have been burning incense. Because this, rather mind-blowingly, is a triclinium. Now why that's mind-blowing, Bill? A triclinium is something we normally associate with the Romans. I've seen something quite similar at Pompeii. So this is a great example of how even the Romans inspire the Nabataeans when building some of these rock-cut tombs. And the Nabataeans, they embraced this part of Roman culture right here, but they also adapted it for their own purposes. Because yes, this was a place for feasting, for drinking, but it was mainly a place of ceremony, for toasting their dead relatives, maybe people who had been placed in the tomb, the obelisk tomb right above, and celebrating their journey into the afterlife.
It's clear that the Nabataeans believed life continued after death. Religion was a vital part of life here. Temples adorned the centre of Petra, and images of gods and goddesses were carved all over the city, hiding in plain sight in niches like this. But who were the deities worshipped here? Many of the carvings in Petra's museum are familiar from other classical cultures. There's a long frieze showing a garland of leaves and fruits being carried by mythical cupids, the sons of Venus, the Roman goddess of love. And there's also this colossal head. It likely depicts an important Nabataean god called Deshara, shown no different to the Greek chief god Zeus. The Nabataeans connected many Greek and Roman gods with their own, representing them in classical-looking sculpture. But at the same time, they also continue to worship their gods in an older, more traditional way. These intricately carved rectangular stones are known as betyls. And this particular betyl is very special. The Nabataean goddess it depicts is unknown, but it's a star exhibit for Petra Museum director Ibrahim Farjat.
Yeah, this is one of the Nabataean idol which was found in Petra in 1975. This is one of the Nabataean gods, by the way, because Nabataeans worship many gods. And this is really very unique. As you see, you can see all the details of the human beings. You can see the eyes, the nose, and the mouth.
Other betyls were much more abstract. This one portrays little more than star-like eyes.
But as you see, in the second one, you can't see the mouth. And maybe that's why, this god, it's unique. You can see all the human beings' details.
Making the god a human being in their imagination.
That's right, yes.
It's amazing to study this object up close, the face of a mysterious Nabataean goddess. Beneath the face is an inscription, revealing the man who dedicated this sacred stone. Hayan, son of Naibat. We know nothing else about Hayan, but the inscription is written in Nabataean.
Do we know much about the Nabataean language itself?
Of course, we do know a lot of the Nabataean language from the Nabataean inscriptions, because in Petra itself we found more than 300 inscriptions.
Wow.
Most of those inscriptions were mentioned like names, gods, memorial inscription, and this is really one of the inscriptions. We knew that Nabataeans, they had 22 letters, and we knew that they used to write from right to left.
Do we think that the Nabataean language, is that a predecessor to Arabic, do we think?
Of course, Nabataean language was like one of the Semitic languages, by the way. Okay, and we knew that maybe the Arabic letters came from the Nabataean letters. That's why, you know, we do think that, especially at the 4th century AD, we do imagine that there is a theory that the Arabic letters came from the Nabataean letters, by the way.
Religious worship would have been happening all across Petra and its rocky canyons. Like many other ancient religions, the Nabataeans believed that their gods lived above them. I'm climbing up in the footsteps of Nabataean priests to the top of a sacred mountain. To be as close to their deities as possible, the Nabataeans placed monuments and performed rituals up high. Two of the main gods of Petra were Deshara and Al-Uzza. Deshara was the lord of the mountain and king of the gods. His wife, Al-Uzza, was the goddess of power and the stars. They were the divine power couple of Petra. These two pointed pillars, called nephishes, high above the city, might have represented them. They are close to one of the most important religious sites in Petra.
After a long walk, you finally make it here, the top of the mountain. It's astonishing how high up we are above Petra. So imagine Nabataeans, loads and loads, a parade of Nabataeans making their way up from the town below, weaving their way up this mountainside, and finally arriving here for religious activity. When you reach the summit, you're greeted by this massive rectangular slab of stone. This was an altar, the main altar. This was where important ritual activities of the Nabataeans would have happened. You can imagine a Nabataean priest walking up to where I am now and making offerings, perhaps the burning of incense and that smell wafting up towards the heavens. Just to the side of the main altar, you have this smaller, circular, shallower altar carved into the rock. And this was likely where libations were poured and sacrifices were made. And when I say sacrifices, I mean animal sacrifices. There is no evidence that the Nabataeans practiced human sacrifice.
Looking out over this landscape, it's fascinating to think about the religious importance this mountaintop held for the Nabataeans. In their eyes, they had much to thank their gods for. By the 1st century AD, Petra and the Nabataean kingdom had become one of the most prosperous powers in the ancient world. But no golden age lasts forever. It wasn't long before another superpower eyed up Nabataean riches for themselves, and this time, they succeeded.
The Nabataean kingdom came crashing down in 106 AD, brought to an end by one of history's most famous destroyers of empires, the Romans. This time it was the Emperor Trajan. The Nabataean kingdom was transformed into the Roman province of Arabia Petraea. But Petra was no longer the capital. Instead, the Romans chose Bosra further north in present-day Syria. Petra was no longer the favoured city in the desert.
The Nabataeans didn't resist the Romans. Petra may have ceased being the capital, but it remained important. A couple of decades after the takeover, Trajan's successor, Hadrian, visited here on his journeys around the Roman Empire, renaming it Hadriana Petra. But this once great city would gradually decline. As the trade routes shifted, the merchants went with them, and the allure of visiting fabled Petra faltered. A great earthquake in 363 AD destroyed much of the city, and within a few centuries Petra was all but abandoned. The Nabataeans vanished from history. The desert had finally claimed back this once wealthy city. Knowledge of this place faded into obscurity, until Burckhardt made that remarkable rediscovery just over 200 years ago.
I have become fascinated with the story of the Nabataeans and their interactions with other great ancient civilizations. And it's by coming to a place like this, coming to Petra, seeing architecture like the treasury, that you begin to realize the great extent of their amazing achievements. But to me, the story of Petra, it isn't just about the Nabataeans. It's about the ingenuity, the creativity, the ambition of human beings, how they were able to create this great center of the ancient world in this seemingly inhospitable environment. Petra, it amazed people back in antiquity, and it continues to awe us down to the present day.